So I came across this tweet earlier on where they've said that the Peace Education Network, a group I've never heard of until today, they have released their new packs, their new resource packs. Okay. And they then say that one of them is called When Mandela Danced in the Square. And as well as that, there's an additional 50 other great global citizenship lessons, right? Including human rights education, of course, and decolonizing the curriculum. And this gives you a wee taster here, exploring our roots and migration. Now, just for anybody who's not aware, very, very briefly, because I don't wish to make this video go on for too long, given the fact there's quite a lot to go through. Who are WASDEC? Well, WASDEC are, as they say themselves, a third sector organisation who have been a trusted provider of professional learning in global citizenship to educators in the west of Scotland for over 2 decades. Headquartered in Glasgow, dedicated to empowering educators across the western region of Scotland, equipping them with expertise in global citizenship, learning for sustainability, and rights-based learning. Right, and then on this one here, this is their latest development. They've teamed up with fellow development education centres across Scotland to deliver the next phase of global citizenship in education, a new set of online professional learning twilight courses for January to March. They cover a wide range of issues, including anti-racism, the sustainable development goals, and more. Right? Their parent company, well, this is what I was referring to as well. Global Citizenship in Scotland, and they've got quite a few webinars coming up soon. Then we've got their parent company. I'm almost certain this is their parent company, the International Development Education Association of Scotland, or IDEAS for short. They believe that young people gain important skills, values, and understanding through good global citizenship education. We believe that a well-networked sector can support teachers and policymakers to deliver the best possible global citizenship education in our schools and youth services, growing globally minded, informed, and active citizens and communities. Okay. So back to the tweet in question. So this link here will take you to the page which is full to the brim of resources. This is one I downloaded earlier. They're all free. I'll just show you them quite quickly. Slavery, then and now, anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic tropes, right? We've got Afghanistan, human rights in Palestine and Israel. Then we come to the second page. We've got youth campaigning, of course, making a change for peace, a changing world, LGBT plus rights in England and Wales, identity and standing up for equality, empathy and compassion. Oh, yeah. We've got, do we need equality for peace? How do pressure groups work for change? Jesus. And then we've got understanding violence and taking action for climate justice, challenging Islamophobia and identity-based violence, exploring our roots and migration, the impact, human impact even, of climate change, gender, war, and conflict. So quite a few. And when you download them, you're presented with, some of them are more than others, but you're presented with PowerPoint presentations and Word documents and whatnot, and it's all sort of set up or laid out even effectively in lesson plan format, because the premise of this effectively is for teachers, because it's incumbent on them now. Even WASDEC's own website more or less alludes to that. The professional standards for Scotland's teachers describe teacher professionalism in Scotland, teachers' way of being. So as I've alluded to before, this is more or less like the academic equivalent of law. So whatever bogus rules the General Teaching Council of Scotland come up with under the guise of professional standards. Teachers and schools have to adhere to these rules and regulations effectively. And it just so happens that they've now teamed up with WASDEC. This was a few years ago. And it says here that the refreshed and restructured professional standards were enacted on the 2nd of August 2021. And WASDEC was delighted to work with the General Teaching Council of Scotland on a new section called Being a Teacher in Scotland, which highlights the professional values of social justice, trust and respect and integrity as central to what it means to be a teacher in Scotland. Oh, right. So the first one that I downloaded was Slavery Then and Now. Now, before I downloaded it, I was pretty much of the belief that it was going to be effectively selective history, where they would home in on the transatlantic slave trade, and they would exclude, deliberately so, any involvement of the African slave trade that was taking place long before Europeans ever set foot on the African continent. There would be no mention whatsoever of the Arab slave trade, no mention of Barbary, the Barbary slave trade. No, nothing like that at all. Deliberate. You know, you have to call into question if this is really about teaching children about history, because if you're not going to include slavery in its entirety, then I don't see the point. Is it an educational procedure, or is it more about propaganda, grooming, even pushing a very select version of events from all those years ago? Because in doing so, it helps them to cement their narrative that they have to continue to perpetuate, that people of color are eternally victimized and oppressed and held back by the white man and his society. If children were to be taught about all the other forms of slavery that took place past and present, including the Barbary slave trade in particular, but not limited to, it would somehow, or it would, dare I say, hinder the sympathy votes that they're trying to obtain by simply speaking about one selective version of history. That said, even if you think what I'm saying there is about outlandish, I would like for you to explain to me then how resources for teachers, who in turn are supposed to take these resources and present them to their class and participate in the activities and whatnot that are all kitted out and designed and described throughout all of the things that are provided, is it that's literally just a few tabs down. We go from Slavery Then and Now to George Floyd. This is the state of Scottish academia. Literally the state of Scottish academia. How has this got any relevancy whatsoever to slavery? But again, because they've managed to home in on one particular aspect of slavery, they get to hide behind that, and they will say that the attitudes from back then that made the white man feel justified in doing what he did is the same attitudes that permeate through society today. But again, what has George Floyd got to do with slavery? What, more importantly, what does the Black Lives Matter movement have to do with slavery? Watch Black Lives Matter video from USA, the 22nd of June, 2020. Why Black Lives Matter? What happened? Black people are most likely to be killed by police. George Floyd, what relevancy, first and foremost, does that have to learning about slavery in the classroom? But second, what did George Floyd's death have to do with racism? So this is a two-pronged attack in many respects, because first and foremost, they're yet again propagandizing the youth with a very selective, deliberately so version of events. But on top of that, they're continuing to push this fucking narrative years on that George Floyd's death was down out of malice, and because Derek Chauvin was racist. So they're peddling lies to children. What happened to transatlantic enslaved people? Enslaved people were abducted by Europeans or African rulers paid by Europeans. See, still their fault, But I mean, even some of the other stuff in here, I'm not going to go through the entirety of it. There's a lot of other stuff that came with this as well. This is just one tiny aspect of it all. But they go on to talk about statues. So now we've got another one that I've downloaded here, and that is Action for climate justice. Okay. And one of the examples of what I was on about earlier when I said that, it's sort of laid out in a lesson plan format. Some of the wee things here, it says, get a pack of playing cards and there'll be statistics to hand out to the class. And there'll be introduction videos about climate justice. Well, that'd be a good place to start. I suppose we can go and watch one of these videos about climate justice and see how it's been defined this time around. Let's see what it says here. Oh, as a starter, learners are going to experience the global data that shows the unequal responsibility and the unequal impact of the climate breakdown, particularly between the global north and the global south. Essentially, you will turn the group into a human pie chart of the world population. Okay, then we come to their video comprehension. And at the end of this, the children should be able to name 3 negative consequences of climate change that are already happening. The children should be able to name today's high-income countries, which make up the global north. Name 3 of them. They should be able to name 2 historical reasons many poorer countries are less able to adapt to climate change today. Name 2 things that high-income countries could do for climate justice, and explain why people say climate change is not fair. Oh, who says that, I wonder? Oh, Jesus. I'll look at this as well, if I can scroll down a bit. Some of the effects named in the video include extreme weather events like flooding, fires, food shortages, people fleeing. I'm loving how they keep incorporating that into all the ramifications of climate change. So people fleeing now. You know what's coming, don't you? However, the answers to number 3 could be slavery, colonialism, violence, and oppression. Of course. So that's the answers to name 2 historical reasons many poorer countries are less able to adapt. So that's the answers, right? So the teacher has the answers, and it's incumbent on the kids to effectively come to some sort of answer that's similar. Whether or not it's verbatim is irrelevant. And how are they going to come up with these answers? Well, they're going to have to be goaded, whether that's via watching the videos or whether that's just from the resources themselves or the sort of discussions at hand. It's fucking brainwashing, fundamentally. Because if you ask me, I don't really see why this should be taught to kids in the first place. They feel, or they pretend to be morally justified in their endeavor when it comes to climate change education, because as far as they're concerned, the science is settled and whatnot. But from where I'm stood, it's pretty clear to me this is just an absolute political opportunism at every fucking turn. Pardon my French. So now we have 2 videos to choose from here. So, and I think I have a feeling that this video on the left-hand side is the one that I shared on Twitter not too long ago. What are the chances of that? Okay.
What is climate justice?
Climate justice means to talk about how climate change affects people, not just the environment, and how it affects some people much more than others. Climate change is very unfair that way. The people who did the least to cause it are already suffering the most, while the people who did most to cause it won't feel the effect for years. Climate justice means we focus on and help those people worst affected right now. We listen to their voices and make decisions that help them.
But to understand why climate change affects people differently, we need to travel back in time.
Hundreds of years ago, European explorers began traveling to other countries and continents, looking for trade. They sailed to places where people already lived, places rich in natural resources and culture. The Europeans decided that they wanted it for themselves. They began to take over and colonize these places, taking what they wanted, including people for slaves. They did this in many, many countries. This meant that the colonizers became very rich, and the people they colonized became poor.
See what I mean, though? This goes back to the thing that I was showing before this about slavery. Now and then, as they called it. No reference whatsoever in any of the resources about any other form of slavery that was taking place around about that era, including the aforementioned Barbary slave trade, which saw whites being enslaved, or the Arab slave trade. It went on for a lot longer than the transatlantic slave trade ever went on for. And of course, they took a hell of a lot more Africans than the Europeans ever did. But we can't talk about that. We can't talk about the barbarity that took place as far as the treatment of the Africans in the care, if you want to call it that, of the Arabs. I'm not saying slavery is right in any capacity. Of course I'm not. But at the end of the day, if you're going to go down that route, they were treated a bit better by Europeans. If Not that it's a competition, but there's no reference to that whatsoever. So those children have just regurgitated. These children are products of these resources like this already as it is. These children that are narrating that video. But those children have just said they've implied, they've indicated, purely because they've been taught, they don't know any different. They're off the belief that all of the slavery that ever took place back in the day was simply white people enslaving everybody that wasn't white. It's not how it happened at all. But you can see straight away how there's some severe malevolence taking place there, where they're now trying to combine multiple different narratives, and that is global citizenship in a nutshell, because it's combining all the different strands of this political cancer that we're seeing, from the climate nonsense to the gender stuff to the LGBT stuff to the race stuff and whatnot. All is combined. So it's slavery. How slavery is related to climate change all of a sudden.
And lost a lot of their natural resources, like forests, good farmland, clean drinking water, and their indigenous knowledge.
And then a couple of hundred years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution. Fossil fuels were burned to power factories and to ship goods and materials around the world. This meant there was huge demand for natural resources, like wood and coal to burn. This caused huge destruction of ecosystems, especially in colonised countries. The Industrial Revolution was the start of climate change. Also, the idea of racism was invented at this time to justify the enslavement of black Africans.
In European countries, during the Industrial Revolution, poor people moved from the countryside to big cities to work in factories. They lost their land, and the working conditions in the factories were terrible, with very low pay. This is still happening in countries across the globe today.
The effects of colonisation, the Industrial Revolution, and racism can still be seen today. Around the world, Indigenous people, people of colour, poorer people, women and children are already suffering because of climate change, even though they did the least to cause it. This is climate injustice.
It's not fair!
What does climate injustice look like?
To talk about unfairness across the globe, people often talk about the global north and
Jesus. And the way that they listed off absolutely every single group of people, bar white men there, which by extension means white boys too, every other group of individuals on the planet is suffering and feeling the effects of climate change. The claim, of course, being that climate change started because of the Industrial Revolution. That's the claim, but it's been presented as fact, which then is the justification, gives them carte blanche to start introducing it to children. And this is the end result. Forgive me for questioning if this is really about quote-unquote climate change at this point, when you start to see absolutely egregious shit like that. Climate justice, a definition. We must accept that climate breakdown is the result of an unfair economic system. This is another thing they keep pushing. And it's very questionable, if you ask me. Is this really about climate change, or is this about getting rid of capitalism? Rich nations must do more to tackle the crisis. We must not only cut greenhouse gas emissions, but build fairer, more just economies. See what I'm saying? We need to get rid of capitalism and in its place have a fair, socially just economy. And the rights and voices of poor and marginalized people must come first in the transition to net zero. So all the people that they've deemed poor or oppressed or marginalized have to be prioritized going forward, despite the fact that there's nothing out there as it stands that's holding these people back in any capacity. They've just been deemed marginalized by these people. Between lessons designed to teach children, allegedly, about slavery, seemingly managing to find a way to tie George Floyd and by extension the Black Lives Matter movement into the conversation, leaves a lot to be desired. That, combined with the fact that they're also in the process of slowly turning the screws and starting to insert anti-white bile into climate hysteria in the classroom. As I said earlier on, it all kind of ties neat and nice back into WASDEG yet again with their definition of global citizenship, where they say themselves that climate breakdown, systemic racism, conflict, and increasing inequality. If we are to respond to the urgent issues we face today, we need to transform the systems which perpetuate harm and injustice. Global citizenship education empowers learners to understand these systems and to act for a peaceful, just, and sustainable world based on human rights, anti-racism, and global solidarity. Really now. Global citizenship education is an empowering and transformative process which enables educators and learners to critically question the causes and effects of social and environmental issues, explore the connections between our lives and those of others, understand the impact of historical injustices such as colonialism on real-world issues, and develop the confidence and skills to disrupt traditional power structures and take action for human rights and global justice. Courtesy of the global goals, courtesy of ideas as well, who I've got here. Share this tab. Why is global citizenship education needed? Our world is an increasingly complex web of connections and interdependencies. Now must be the time for education that is transformative, an education that provides all learners with the tools they need to understand and engage with those opportunities and challenges to play their part in creating a fairer, better world. Oh, how convenient. Politicizing children. Equip people with the knowledge and skills needed to counter misinformation. Promote and value diverse voices and perspectives. Strengthen connections between learning in the classroom and real life context and experiences. Develop better understanding of the historic injustices that have shaped our societies. Build awareness and understanding with local and global issues. Inspire, hope, and motivate people to take action, both individually and collectively, to deliver solutions for our planet and its people. Yeah. Yep. So I'll leave it on that. But yeah, George Floyd and anti-white climate bile. Yeah. And much, much more if you so choose to go and have a nosy for yourself. But I didn't really wish to put that all into the one video. Adios. Peace.